The security guard's face went pale as every turnstile in the gleaming corporate lobby suddenly blazed green. Denise Walker stood there in her worn sneakers and faded hoodie, keycard still pressed against the scanner, watching 20 years of assumptions crumble in real time. "I'm not the cleaner," she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of a woman who had climbed every rung of the corporate ladder only to be mistaken for someone seeking the service entrance. "I sign your paychecks." What happened next would shake the very foundations of Meridian Financial Group. But the real story began much earlier, in a small apartment where a young girl dreamed of breaking barriers that seemed impossible to cross. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The alarm buzzed at 4:11 a.m. in Denise Walker's penthouse apartment, though she had been awake for the past hour, staring at the ceiling and running through the day's board meeting in her mind. At 38, she had become the youngest chief executive officer in Meridian Financial Group's 80-year history, a milestone that should have felt triumphant, but instead carried the constant weight of proving herself worthy of a position that many believed she had received through diversity initiatives rather than merit. She slipped into her morning routine with practiced efficiency, her bare feet padding across the cold marble floors of her minimalist bathroom. The mirror reflected back a woman who had learned to armor herself in perfectly pressed suits and flawless makeup, but today felt different. Today, she craved authenticity over appearance. The board meeting would determine whether Meridian would approve her revolutionary community investment program, a project that could bring banking services to underserved neighborhoods across the country. It was personal for Denise, rooted in memories of her grandmother walking 3 miles to cash a check because no bank would open a branch in their neighborhood. Instead of reaching for one of her dozen tailored blazers, Denise pulled on a soft gray hoodie that she had owned since her MBA program at Wharton. The fabric was worn thin at the elbows, and a small stain near the pocket reminded her of late nights spent studying financial models in the library. She paired it with dark jeans and her most comfortable sneakers, white leather scuffed from weekend walks through Central Park. If the board was going to reject her proposal, she reasoned, they might as well reject the real her. The elevator in her building descended silently from the 40th floor, carrying her toward a day that would test everything she had built. Denise had climbed from an entry-level analyst position to the executive suite through sheer determination and an ability to see financial opportunities that others missed. She had navigated corporate politics with the grace of someone who understood that every interaction was being scrutinized. Every decision weighed against the unspoken question of whether she truly belonged in rooms where she was often the only person who looked like her. Her phone buzzed with messages as she settled into the back seat of her usual rideshare car. Marcus, her deputy CEO, had sent 3 texts about last-minute changes to the presentation slides. The board members had been lobbying each other behind the scenes, trying to build consensus against what they viewed as a risky venture into social responsibility rather than pure profit maximization. Denise typed back reassurances while watching the city wake up around her, street vendors setting up their carts, and construction workers heading to job sites with the same determination that had driven her own rise. Through the corporate world, the car pulled up to Meridian Tower at exactly 7:15 a.m., 30 minutes before her first scheduled meeting. The building rose 45 stories into the Manhattan sky, its glass and steel facade reflecting the morning sun like a beacon of financial power. Denise had worked in this building for nearly 15 years, starting as a 23-year-old analyst with student loans that exceeded her annual salary and dreams that seemed impossibly large for someone from Makeshell. Her background: she approached the main entrance with the casual confidence of someone who belonged there, her sneakers squeaking slightly against the polished marble floors of the lobby. The space was designed to intimidate, with soaring ceilings and abstract art installations that probably cost more than most people's homes. Security turnstiles formed a barrier between the public lobby and the elevators, each one requiring a keycard for access. "Excuse me, miss." The voice stopped her mid-stride, authoritative and tinged with the kind of condescension that immediately raised her hackles. Security guard Reynolds stood behind his desk, a heavy-set man in his 50s whose uniform was pressed to military precision. He had been working at Meridian for over a decade, long enough to know the faces of most executives, though apparently not long enough to recognize the woman who had been featured on the company's annual report cover. Just 6 months earlier. Denise turned toward him, one eyebrow raised in mild curiosity. Yes? Cleaning staff and service workers need to use the back entrance, Reynolds said, his tone suggesting this was a routine correction rather than a catastrophic mistake. Main elevators are for employees and visitors only. You can access the freight elevator through the loading dock on West 42nd Street. The words hit Denise like a physical blow, though she kept her expression neutral through years of practice at concealing her reactions to casual racism. She had been mistaken for many things over the years: a secretary, an intern, someone's assistant, but never the cleaning staff. The assumption felt particularly stinging because her own mother had worked as a cleaner to put herself through community college, taking night shifts at office buildings while studying accounting during the day. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" Denise asked, her voice carrying a dangerous quiet that should have warned Reynolds he was walking into a minefield. "The service entrance is around back," he repeated, gesturing vaguely toward the rear of the building. "All delivery personnel and cleaning contractors have to check in through the loading dock. Company policy." He returned his attention to his computer screen, dismissing her with the casual indifference of someone who believed the conversation was over. Denise felt the familiar fire that had propelled her through every challenge of her career. The same burning determination that had gotten her through calculus classes, where professors assumed she was unprepared. Through job interviews where she was asked about her qualifications twice as many times as her white male counterparts. Through board meetings where her ideas were dismissed until a male colleague repeated them nearly verbatim. But this was different. This was her building, her company, her territory. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her keycard, a sleek black rectangle with a small chip that contained more access permissions than any other employee in the building. The card was linked to biometric scanners, security cameras, and executive parking spaces. He could open conference rooms, executive washrooms, and even the private elevator that led directly to the C-suite on the 43rd floor. "Let me ask you something," Denise said, walking slowly toward the turnstiles while Reynolds continued typing at his workstation. "Do you recognize this?" She held up the keycard, letting the lobby's recessed lighting catch the gold lettering that spelled out her name and title. Reynolds glanced up briefly, his expression suggesting mild annoyance at the interruption. "Look, I don't care what kind of contractor badge you have. All service workers use the back entrance. That's final." Denise smiled, the kind of expression that her MBA classmates had learned to fear during case study competitions. It was the smile of someone who held all the cards and was about to play them strategically. She approached the nearest turnstile and pressed her keycard against the scanner. The response was immediate and spectacular. Every turnstile in the lobby simultaneously erupted in green light, their LED displays flashing "Executive Access Authorized" in bright letters. The security system's central computer registered the presence of the company's highest-ranking executive and automatically elevated the building's status to full operational mode. Lights brightened throughout the lobby. The executive elevator bank chimed to life, and somewhere in the building's management center, alarms began indicating that the CEO had arrived for the day. The transformation was so dramatic that several early arriving employees stopped to stare. The lobby, which had been operating in its subdued morning mode, suddenly felt alive with electronic activity. Digital displays near the elevators began cycling through company announcements and stock prices, and the building's climate control system adjusted to accommodate increased occupancy in the executive floors. Reynolds looked up from his computer screen, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and dawning horror as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. The woman he had directed to the service entrance was not a cleaner or a delivery worker. She was Denise Walker, Chief Executive Officer, the person whose photograph hung in the building's main corridor alongside the portraits of previous company leaders. "I'm not the cleaner," Denise said, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet lobby with crystalline clarity. "I sign your paychecks." The silence that followed was deafening. Reynolds stood behind his desk like a statue, his mouth opening and closing without producing sound. Other security guards began emerging from their stations, drawn by the commotion and the unusual light display from the turnstiles. A few early employees had gathered near the coffee stand, their conversations dying as they witnessed what was clearly a significant moment unfolding. Denise walked through the turnstile with measured steps, her sneakers squeaking against the marble in a rhythm that seemed to echo through the cavernous space. She could feel the weight of every gaze in the lobby, could sense the phones being discreetly pulled from pockets to capture video of whatever was happening. But she had learned long ago that moments like these required careful handling. How she responded now would define not just her own reputation, but potentially the culture of the entire organization. She turned back toward Reynolds, who was still frozen behind his security desk, his face pale and his hands trembling slightly as the full implications of his error began to sink in. Around them, the lobby had filled with the quiet tension of a crowd witnessing something unprecedented. "Mr. Reynolds," Denise said, reading his name from the tag on his uniform. Her voice was steady and professional, carrying the authority that had been earned through years of making decisions that affected thousands of employees and billions in assets. "I think we need to have a conversation." The security guard managed to find his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Ms. Walker, I had no idea. I'm so sorry." "I'm sure you are," Denise replied, walking back toward his desk with slow, deliberate steps. "But I'm more interested in understanding how this happened than in receiving apologies." She glanced around the lobby, noting the faces of employees and visitors who were trying to appear busy while obviously listening to every word. "Perhaps we could speak privately?" Reynolds nodded frantically, his earlier authority completely evaporated. He gestured toward a small office behind the security station, his hands shaking as he fumbled with his keys. The space was cramped and functional, lined with monitors showing feeds from security cameras throughout the building. Denise could see herself on several screens, captured from different angles as she had approached the turnstiles and experienced her moment of technological vindication. "Please, sit down," she said, gesturing toward the chair behind his desk. The role reversal was not lost on either of them. Reynolds, who had been in control of the situation just minutes earlier, now found himself being directed by the woman he had dismissed. "Ms. Walker, I don't know what to say," Reynolds began, his voice thick with embarrassment and fear. "I've been working security for 11 years, and I always try to be professional. Tell me what you saw when I walked into the lobby," Denise interrupted gently. "I'm not asking to embarrass you. I genuinely want to understand the thought process." Reynolds swallowed hard, his eyes darting around the small office as if searching for an escape route. I saw someone in casual clothes, and I just assumed, with the hoodie and sneakers." He trailed off, realizing how his explanation sounded. "You saw a black woman in casual clothes and assumed I was service staff," Denise said, filling in the words he was reluctant to speak. "Is that accurate?" The directness of the question seemed to break something in Reynolds. His shoulders sagged, and he looked down at his hands. "Yes, ma'am. I'm ashamed to admit it, but yes. I made assumptions based on things I shouldn't have been thinking about." Denise leaned back in her chair, studying the man across from her. She had encountered his type of prejudice countless times throughout her career, but rarely in such a stark and undeniable form. Usually, it was more subtle, hidden behind professional courtesy and plausible deniability. This moment offered something different, an opportunity for genuine dialogue and potentially real change. "How many other executives have you seen dressed casually?" she asked. Reynolds looked up, confusion flickering across his features. "I'm sorry? In your 11 years here, how many times have you seen senior executives come to work in jeans and sneakers?" The question forced Reynolds to think, to examine his own memories and biases. "Well, there was Mr. Chen from IT. He sometimes wears casual clothes on weekends. And Ms. Rodriguez from marketing. She came in wearing workout clothes after that charity run last year. Why? Why?" He paused, the implications of his own words beginning to dawn on him. "But I always recognized them because you expected to see them," Denise said. "Because in your mind, executives look a certain way. They're people you've been introduced to, people whose faces you've memorized, people who fit a particular image of what leadership looks like." The conversation was interrupted by a soft knock on the office door. Marcus Chen, Denise's deputy CEO, peered inside with an expression of barely controlled panic. "Denise, I heard there was some kind of situation downstairs. The security desk called up to my office." "Come in, Marcus," Denise said, gesturing toward the cramped space. "Mr. Reynolds and I were just having a discussion about assumptions and first impressions." Marcus squeezed into the office, his tall frame making the small space feel even more confined. At 35, he was one of the youngest deputy CEOs in the financial sector, a brilliant strategist who had been Denise's closest ally in building the community investment program. His presence immediately shifted the dynamic in the room, adding a witness to what had become an impromptu lesson in corporate culture. "Reynolds here mistook me for cleaning staff," Denise explained with characteristic directness. "He directed me to use the service entrance." Marcus's expression cycled through surprise, anger, and something approaching disbelief. He had worked closely with Denise for 3 years and had witnessed the subtle and not-so-subtle forms of discrimination she faced. But this level of blatant disrespect was shocking even by those standards. "That's completely unacceptable," Marcus said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Mr. Reynolds, do you understand the gravity of what happened here?" "Please," Denise interjected before Reynolds could respond. "This isn't about punishment. It's about understanding." She turned back to the security guard, who was looking increasingly miserable. "I want you to tell me about your training. When you started working here, what were you taught about identifying executives and employees?" The question seemed to catch Reynolds off guard. "We have a database with photos of all the senior staff," he said slowly. "And we're supposed to recognize board members and C-suite executives on site. But honestly, Ms. Walker, your photo in our system is from when you were VP of Operations. It's at least 3 years old, and you were wearing a business suit." Denise nodded, filing away this information. The company's security protocols were clearly outdated, relying on static images rather than current identification methods. But the deeper issue was the unconscious bias that had led Reynolds to dismiss her before even considering that she might be an executive. "What else influenced your assumption?" she pressed. Reynolds hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "Well, it was early, and most executives don't arrive until after 8. And the way you were dressed." He stopped himself, recognizing the trap in his own words. "The way I was dressed," Denise repeated. "Tell me, what should an executive look like when they come to work early on a Saturday morning to prepare for a board meeting?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus watched the exchange with fascination, recognizing Denise's teaching style from their strategy sessions. She had a gift for asking questions that forced people to examine their own assumptions and reach conclusions organically, rather than through confrontation. I guess I never thought about it that way," Reynolds admitted. "I just always assumed that executives would dress professionally, even on weekends." "And what about comfort?" Denise asked. "What about the possibility that someone might choose to dress for their own comfort and productivity, rather than to meet other people's expectations?" The security guard was quiet for a moment, processing the implications of her words. Around them, the sounds of the building coming to life filtered through the thin walls, elevator bells chiming and voices echoing in the lobby as more employees arrived for the day. "I think I'm beginning to understand," Reynolds said finally. "I made assumptions based on my own limited experience rather than considering all the possibilities." "That's exactly right," Denise said, her tone warming slightly. "And those assumptions had real consequences. They made me feel unwelcome in my own building, in a company I've worked for 15 years to help build." Marcus shifted in his chair, clearly struggling with his own anger at the situation. "Denise, I have to ask, how do you want to handle this? From a policy perspective, I mean. This can't just be swept under the rug." Denise considered the question carefully. Her first instinct was to turn this into a teachable moment for the entire organization, but she also recognized the delicate balance between education and humiliation. Reynolds had made a serious error, but destroying his livelihood wouldn't address the systemic issues that had led to the mistake. "Here's what we're going to do," she said, addressing both men. "Mr. Reynolds, you're going to help me design a new training program for security staff. I want you to think about every assumption you made this morning and help us create protocols that prevent similar incidents in the future." Reynolds looked up with surprise and what might have been relief. "You're not going to fire me?" "I'm going to give you the opportunity to be part of the solution," Denise replied. "But this is contingent on your commitment to genuine change, not just saying the right words to keep your job." Marcus nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the kind of restorative approach that makes sense. Turn the mistake into an opportunity for organizational learning." "There's more," Denise continued. "I want security staff to receive updated photographs of all executives quarterly, not just when someone gets promoted. And I want cultural sensitivity training that addresses unconscious bias, not tamara. Just generic diversity workshops." She stood up, her movement signaling that the conversation was shifting toward action rather than analysis. "But first, Mr. Reynolds, I need you to understand something personal. My mother worked as a cleaner for 15 years while she put herself through school. She would come home with her hands raw from cleaning chemicals. Exhausted but determined to build a better life for our family. There is absolutely nothing shameful about cleaning buildings or any other honest work." The words carried a weight that seemed to fill the small office. Reynolds nodded, his understanding clearly deepening beyond the immediate situation to encompass the broader implications of his assumptions. "The problem wasn't that you thought I might be a cleaner," Denise continued. "The problem was that you thought being a cleaner meant I didn't deserve the same respect as anyone else walking into this building." Marcus cleared his throat, glancing at his watch. "Denise, I hate to interrupt, but the board meeting starts in an hour, and there are some last-minute issues with the presentation that we need to address." Denise nodded, the reminder bringing her back to the day's primary challenge. The community investment program was still hanging in the balance, and her confrontation with security had already consumed valuable preparation time. But as she looked at Reynolds, she realized that this morning's incident had crystallized something important about her approach to leadership. "Mr. Reynolds, I want you to think about what happened here today," she said. "Not just the mistake, but the conversation that followed. I want you to consider how we might use this experience to make Meridian a more inclusive place for everyone who walks through those doors." "Yes, ma'am," Reynolds replied, his voice carrying a sincerity that hadn't been there at the beginning of their conversation. "I promise you, this will never happen again." "I believe you," Denise said, extending her hand for a shake. "And I'm counting on you to help ensure it doesn't happen to anyone else either." As they left the security office, Marcus fell into step beside her, his expression reflecting both admiration and concern. "That was masterfully handled," he said quietly. "But are you sure you want to spend political capital on this right now? The board is already skeptical about the community program, and if word gets out about this incident—" Denise paused at the elevator bank, considering his words. Marcus was right about the political calculations. The board meeting would determine the fate of her signature initiative, a program that could bring banking services to underserved communities across the country. Some board members were already questioning whether she was too focused on social issues rather than pure profit maximization. "You think this makes me look weak?" she asked. "I think it makes you look human," Marcus replied. "But I'm not sure the board is ready for a human CEO right now. They want someone who fits their image of strong leadership." The elevator doors opened, revealing a space lined with mahogany panels and brass fixtures. As they rose toward the executive floors, Denise found herself reflecting on the morning's events and their potential impact on everything she had worked to achieve. "Maybe that's exactly why this matters," she said finally. "Maybe the board needs to see that real leadership isn't about fitting someone else's image. It's about creating space for everyone to succeed." The elevator chimed softly as they reached the 43rd floor, and the doors opened to reveal the executive suite of Meridian Financial Group. The space was designed to convey power and stability, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of Manhattan and conference rooms named after financial giants from the company's history. Denise's corner office occupied nearly a quarter of the floor, with glass walls that could be made opaque for private meetings and a sitting area that had hosted countless strategy sessions with department heads and external partners. Her assistant, Patricia, was already at her desk despite the early hour, reviewing the day's schedule and fielding calls from board members who wanted to discuss the community investment proposal before the formal BAS meeting. "Good morning, Ms. Walker," Patricia said, looking up from her computer with the efficient smile of someone who had been managing executive schedules for over 20 years. "I've had 4 calls already this morning from board members wanting to schedule pre-meeting conversations. Should I tell them you're unavailable?" "No, let's accommodate them," Denise replied, settling behind her desk and powering up her computer. "I want every board member to feel heard before we walk into that room." Marcus collapsed into one of the chairs facing her desk, pulling out his tablet to review the presentation materials. "Are we still planning to lead with the financial projections, or do you want to start with the community impact data?" The question forced Denise to shift her mental focus from the morning security incident to the challenge that lay ahead. The Community Investment Program represented 18 months of research, analysis, and relationship building with community organizations across the country. The proposal would establish banking branches in underserved neighborhoods, offer microloans to small business owners who couldn't access traditional financing, and provide financial literacy programs in schools and community centers. "Let's start with the numbers," Denise said, reviewing the slides on her screen. "The board responds to data, so we'll give them data, but I want to end with the stories, the real people who will benefit from this program." Her phone buzzed with a text message from board member Catherine Hartwell, one of the most influential voices on the 12-person board. "Need to speak with you before the meeting. Are you free for a quick call?" Denise showed the message to Marcus, who grimaced. "Hartwell's been building opposition to the program for weeks. She thinks it's too risky, too focused on social impact rather than shareholder returns." "Then let's give her a chance to air her concerns," Denise said, dialing Hartwell's number. The call connected immediately, suggesting that the board member had been waiting by her phone. "Denise, thank you for taking my call." Hartwell's voice carried the crisp authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "I wanted to discuss some concerns about today's proposal before we get into the formal meeting." "Of course, Catherine. What's on your mind?" "I'll be direct," Hartwell said. "Several board members are worried that this community investment program is more about personal mission than business strategy. We're concerned that you're letting your background influence your judgment about what's best for the company." The words stung, particularly coming so soon after the morning's incident with security. Denise felt the familiar tension of having her motivations questioned and her qualifications scrutinized in ways that her predecessors had never experienced. "Catherine, the program is projected to generate positive returns within 3 years," Denise replied, keeping her voice level. "We've identified significant market opportunities in underserved communities, and we have partnerships in place to minimize risk while maximizing impact. But the returns are lower than what we could achieve through traditional investment strategies," Hartwell countered. "And there's substantial reputational risk if the program fails. Some of us are concerned that you're asking shareholders to subsidize social work rather than focusing on core banking services." Marcus was taking notes, his expression growing increasingly tense as he listened to Hartwell's objections. He had helped develop the financial models that supported the community investment program, and he knew the numbers were solid, but he also understood the political dynamics at play. "I appreciate your concerns," Denise said, "but I think you're underestimating both the financial opportunity and the strategic importance of this program. We're not talking about charity. We're talking about expanding our market reach and building customer loyalty in communities that have been ignored by traditional banking." End quote. "That's a nice way to frame it," Hartwell replied. "But the bottom line is that you're proposing to invest hundreds of millions of dollars in markets that other banks have avoided for good reason. Some of us think that money would be better used for share buybacks or dividend increases." The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, with Hartwell raising objections that Denise had anticipated and prepared for. But underneath the financial arguments, she could hear the subtext, doubt about whether a young black CEO was making decisions based on sound business judgment or personal agenda. "I look forward to presenting the full proposal to the board," Denise said finally. "I think once everyone sees the complete analysis, they'll understand why this program represents the future of community banking." "We'll see," Hartwell replied coolly. "I hope you're prepared for some tough questions." After ending the call, Denise sat back in her chair and rubbed her temples. The morning had started with a security guard questioning her right to enter her own building, and now she was facing questions about her right to lead her own company in the direction she believed it needed to go. That sounded challenging, Marcus said diplomatically. She's going to try to frame this as emotional decision-making rather than strategic thinking, Denise replied. She wants the board to see me as someone who's letting personal feelings override business judgment. But the numbers support the program, Marcus protested. The market research shows clear demand for banking services in underserved communities, and our risk analysis indicates manageable exposure with significant upside potential. Denise nodded, but she understood that the debate would extend beyond pure financial considerations. Her position as CEO had always required navigating questions about her qualifications and motivations that her predecessors had never faced. Today's board meeting would be another test of her ability to lead, while constantly proving that she deserved the opportunity to do so. Patricia knocked on the glass door and entered with a fresh cup of coffee and a stack of morning newspapers. The Wall Street Journal has a positive piece about community banking initiatives, she said, placing the papers on Denise's desk. And I've confirmed attendance for all 12 board members. The meeting is still scheduled for 9:30. Denise glanced at her watch, noting that she had 30 minutes before the board meeting. The security chief's timing was poor, but the conversation couldn't be delayed much longer without appearing to dismiss the morning's incident entirely. "Send him in," she said. "Marcus, can you give us a few minutes?" Marcus gathered his materials and headed toward the door, pausing to squeeze Denise's shoulder in a gesture of support. "You've got this," he said quietly. "Don't let them make you doubt yourself." Chief Morrison entered the office with the bearing of a man accustomed to delivering bad news to executives. In his mid-50s, with graying hair and a military posture, he had been responsible for Meridian's security operations for over 8 years. His expression was carefully neutral, but Denise could see the tension in his jaw. "Ms. Walker, thank you for making time to see me," he began, settling into the chair Marcus had vacated. "I've reviewed the security footage from this morning's incident, and I want to personally apologize for what occurred." "I appreciate that, Chief Morrison," Denise replied. "But I'm more interested in understanding how we prevent similar incidents than in receiving apologies. What did your review reveal?" Morrison opened a folder and pulled out several printed screenshots from security cameras. The images showed Denise approaching the lobby, her conversation with Reynolds, and the moment when the turnstiles had erupted in green light. "The breakdown occurred at multiple levels," he said, his tone professional but clearly uncomfortable. "Reynolds failed to recognize you despite having access to executive photographs. He made assumptions based on your casual attire rather than following proper identification protocols. And our training program clearly hasn't adequately addressed unconscious bias in security assessments." End quote. Denise studied the photographs, seeing herself through the lens of the security cameras. In the images, she looked exactly like what she was, a professional woman dressed casually for weekend work. But she could also understand how someone with limited exposure to diverse executives might make incorrect assumptions. "What changes are you proposing?" she asked. "Immediate retraining for all security staff on executive identification and respectful interaction protocols," Morrison replied. "Updated photograph databases that are refreshed monthly rather than annually, and mandatory unconscious bias training that goes beyond our current diversity workshops." "That's a good start," Denise said. "But I want to go further. I want security staff to understand that their job is to provide assistance and information, not to make assumptions about who belongs in this building." Morrison nodded, making notes on his tablet. "We can absolutely restructure the training around service rather than gatekeeping, and I want to personally work with you to ensure that Reynolds understands the gravity of what occurred without losing his job over a mistake that reflects broader systemic issues." End quote. The conversation was interrupted by Patricia's voice over the intercom. "Ms. Walker, I'm sorry to interrupt, but board members are beginning to arrive. You might want to consider heading to the boardroom soon." Denise felt her pulse quicken as the reality of the upcoming meeting settled over her. In less than 30 minutes, she would be defending not just her community investment program, but potentially her entire approach to leadership. "Chief Morrison, let's continue this conversation after the board meeting," she said, standing up from her desk. I want to be involved in designing the new training protocols, but right now, I need to focus on other priorities. Of course, Morrison replied, gathering his materials. And Ms. Walker, for what it's worth, I think the way you handled this morning's situation showed exactly the kind of leadership this company needs. As he left, Denise took a moment to collect herself, looking out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the Manhattan skyline. Somewhere in the city below, there were communities without access to basic banking services, small business owners who couldn't get loans, and families who had to travel miles to cash paychecks. The community investment program wasn't just about corporate strategy. It was about extending opportunity to people who had been systematically excluded from financial services. She gathered her presentation materials and headed toward the boardroom, her sneakers silent against the carpeted hallway. The space was already filling with board members, their conversations creating a low hum of anticipation and tension. The Meridian boardroom was designed to intimidate, with a massive mahogany table that could seat 20 people and portraits of the company's founding partners lining the walls. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered commanding views of the financial district, and the latest technology allowed for seamless presentations and video conferencing with remote participants. Board Chairman William Harrison was already seated at the head of the table, reviewing documents with the focused attention that had made him one of the most respected figures in banking. At 72, he had led Meridian's board for over a decade and had been instrumental in Denise's appointment as CEO. His support would be crucial in the debate that was about to unfold. "Good morning, Denise," Harrison said, looking up from his papers. "I trust you're ready for what promises to be a spirited discussion." "Always," she replied, taking her seat at the opposite end of the table from Harrison. The seating arrangement was symbolic, positioning her as the focus of attention and scrutiny. Other board members were filing in, their greetings ranging from warm to coolly professional. Catherine Hartwell entered with her usual commanding presence, nodding briefly at Denise before taking her seat and immediately beginning a whispered conversation with board member Richard Sterling. David Roberts caught Denise's eye and offered a subtle thumbs up, while board member Linda Kim smiled encouragingly from across the table. The political alliances were already forming, and Denise found herself mentally counting votes as each member settled into their chair. "Ladies and gentlemen, let's call this meeting to order," Harrison said, his voice carrying easily across the large room. "We have several items on today's agenda, but I know everyone is particularly interested in Ms. Walker's presentation on the proposed community investment program." Denise activated the room's presentation system, her slides appearing on multiple screens around the boardroom. The first slide displayed the program's official title and projected financial returns, leading with the numbers that Roberts had advised her to emphasize. "Thank you, Chairman Harrison," she began, her voice steady and confident despite the morning's earlier challenges. "The Community Investment Program represents a strategic expansion into underserved markets with projected returns of 12% annually over the first 3 years." She clicked to the next slide, which displayed detailed financial projections broken down by geographic region and service category. The numbers were impressive, showing revenue growth that would exceed the company's traditional investment strategies within the program's second year of operation. "Our market research indicates significant demand for banking services in communities that have been historically underserved by traditional financial institutions," Denise continued. "We're not talking about charity or social work. We're talking about accessing markets with combined annual income of over $15 billion. Board member Margaret Foster raised her hand, her expression skeptical. "Denise, if these markets are so lucrative, why haven't other banks moved into them already? What are we missing that everyone else has seen?" The question was exactly what Denise had expected, and she was prepared with data to support her response. "Other banks have avoided these markets because they've relied on traditional metrics that don't account for community-based banking relationships," she replied. "Our pilot programs have shown that customer loyalty rates in underserved communities exceed industry averages by 38%. She clicked to a slide showing customer retention statistics from 3 pilot branches that had been operating for the past 18 months. The numbers were compelling, demonstrating that community-focused banking could generate both financial returns and customer loyalty. "But what about default rates?" Hartwell interjected, her tone sharp with challenge. Surely there's higher risk associated with lending in low-income communities. Actually, our default rates in pilot communities have been lower than our traditional branches, Denise replied, clicking to a slide that displayed comparative default statistics. When customers feel that their bank is invested in their community's success, they're more likely to prioritize loan repayment and maintain positive relationships. The presentation continued for 20 minutes, with Denise walking through financial projections, risk assessments, and implementation timelines. She could see board members taking notes, some nodding approvingly, while others maintained expressions of skepticism. When she reached the final slide, which displayed projected 5-year returns and community impact metrics, she paused to look around the table. The Community Investment Program offers Meridian the opportunity to grow our market share while building the kind of customer relationships that will sustain our success for decades to come. Thank you, Denise, Harrison said. The floor is now open for questions and discussion. Hartwell was the first to speak, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to dominating boardroom debates. I appreciate the thoroughness of the presentation, she began, but I have serious concerns about the underlying assumptions of this program. She stood up, moving to the front of the room with the confidence of someone presenting an alternative vision. Meridian Financial Group has built its reputation on disciplined risk management and consistent returns to shareholders. This program asks us to venture into unproven markets based on limited pilot data. Denise felt her jaw tighten, but she maintained her professional composure. She had anticipated Hartwell's objections, but hearing them articulated in front of the full board was still challenging. More fundamentally, Hartwell continued, I question whether this program represents sound business strategy or personal mission. Ms. Walker has been admirably transparent about her background and her commitment to serving underrepresented communities, but we need to ask whether those personal values are influencing her judgment about what's best for our shareholders. End quote. The attack was more direct than Denise had expected, and she could see several board members shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Harrison's expression was carefully neutral, but she could sense his displeasure with the personal nature of Hartwell's comments. Catherine, I think that's an unfair characterization, Roberts interjected from across the table. Denise has presented comprehensive financial analysis supporting this program. Her motivations are irrelevant if the numbers work. But do the numbers work? Sterling asked, speaking for the first time since the meeting began. We're looking at 18 months of pilot data and extrapolating to a multi-hundred-million-dollar investment. That seems like a significant leap of faith. Denise recognized the moment as a crucial turning point in the debate. She could either defend herself against the personal attacks or redirect the conversation back to the program's merits. Her instinct was to address Hartwell's implications directly, but she knew that engaging in personal defense might validate the very concerns being raised. I'd like to address the risk question, she said, standing up and moving toward the presentation screen. Sterling raises a valid point about extrapolating from limited data, so let me show you additional analysis that we haven't discussed yet. She activated her tablet and pulled up a series of slides that hadn't been part of her prepared presentation. The data showed market analysis from similar programs at other financial institutions, regulatory trends supporting community banking initiatives, and demographic projections that supported long-term growth in target communities. The pilot programs were designed to test specific assumptions about community banking relationships, she explained. But our broader market analysis draws on industry data from dozens of institutions that have implemented similar programs over the past decade. She clicked through slides showing success stories from credit unions, community banks, and regional institutions that had built profitable operations in underserved markets. The data was compelling, demonstrating that community-focused banking could generate sustainable returns when implemented with appropriate risk management protocols. What about regulatory risk? Foster asked. Community lending programs often face scrutiny from federal regulators, and compliance costs can be significant. We've already engaged with regulatory authorities during the pilot phase, Denise and Daff replied. In fact, federal regulators have been supportive of our approach because it aligns with Community Reinvestment Act requirements while generating positive financial returns. The questions continued for another 30 minutes, with board members probing various aspects of the program's implementation and risk management. Denise found herself increasingly confident as the discussion progressed, her answers demonstrating the depth of analysis that had gone into the proposal. But she could also sense that the fundamental disagreement wasn't really about financial projections or risk assessments. It was about vision and values, about what kind of institution Meridian wanted to be and who should have the authority to make that determination. "I'd like to return to a fundamental question," Hartwell said during a brief lull in the technical discussion. "Is this program consistent with our fiduciary responsibility to shareholders? Are we being asked to prioritize social impact over financial returns?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Denise realized that this was the moment she had been preparing for throughout her entire career. She could give the safe answer, emphasizing financial returns and downplaying social impact. Or she could articulate a vision of leadership that integrated both financial success and community responsibility. "Catherine, I think you're creating a false choice," she said, her voice carrying a conviction that surprised even her. "The most successful financial institutions of the next decade will be those that understand the connection between community investment and long-term profitability." She clicked to a slide showing customer loyalty statistics, employee retention rates, and brand reputation metrics from companies that had implemented similar programs. "When we invest in communities, we're not sacrificing returns. We're building the foundation for sustainable growth." "But what if you're wrong?" Hartwell pressed. "What if the financial projections don't materialize and we're left with hundreds of millions in investments that don't generate adequate returns?" Denise paused, recognizing that the question went to the heart of leadership and decision-making under uncertainty. She could see board members leaning forward, waiting for her response. "Then, I'll take responsibility for that failure," she said simply. "But I believe the greater risk is in maintaining the status quo while our competitors move into markets that we're too cautious to enter." She looked around the table, making eye contact with each board member. "This industry is changing rapidly, and institutions that can't adapt to serve diverse communities will find themselves increasingly irrelevant. The Community Investment Program positions Meridian to lead that change rather than react to it." Harrison cleared his throat, signaling that the discussion was reaching its conclusion. "I think we've had a thorough exploration of the issues," he said. "Unless there are additional questions, I'd like to call for a vote." The room fell silent as board members considered their positions. Denise could feel her heart racing, knowing that the next few minutes would determine not just the fate of her program, but potentially her future as CEO. "All in favor of approving the Community Investment Program as presented?" Harrison asked. Hands began rising around the table. Roberts was first, followed quickly by Kim and Foster. Two other members raised their hands after a moment's hesitation, and then Harrison himself voted in favor. Denise counted 6 hands, one short of the majority needed for approval. Her stomach sank as she realized that months of work might be about to collapse. But then board member James Morrison, who had been silent throughout the meeting, slowly raised his hand. "I think this program represents exactly the kind of forward-thinking strategy that Meridian needs," he said. 7 votes. The program was approved. Hartwell's expression was carefully neutral, but Denise could see the disappointment in her posture. "I respect the board's decision," she said diplomatically. "I hope the program exceeds even your optimistic projections." As board members began gathering their materials and engaging in post-meeting conversations, Harrison approached Denise with a slight smile. "Congratulations," he said quietly. "That was exactly the kind of leadership presentation that convinced me you were the right person for this job." "Thank you, Chairman Harrison," Denise replied, feeling a mixture of relief and exhaustion. "I won't let the board down." "I know you won't," he said. "But I also want you to understand that this was about more than just one program. Today you demonstrated the ability to lead under pressure while staying true to your vision. That's exactly what this company needs." As the boardroom emptied, Denise found herself alone with her presentation materials and her thoughts. The morning had begun with a security guard questioning her right to enter the building, and it was ending with board approval for the most significant initiative of her career. She gathered her slides and headed back toward her office, her sneakers silent against the carpeted hallway. Patricia was waiting with a stack of congratulatory messages from executives who had already heard about the board's decision. "The local news is requesting interviews about the community investment program," Patricia said. "And the Wall Street Journal wants to schedule a feature story about your leadership approach." Denise settled behind her desk, feeling the weight of the day's events beginning to settle into a coherent narrative. The security incident, the board meeting, and the program approval were all connected by threads of assumption, challenge, and ultimately, recognition. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus. "Congratulations! When do we start implementation?" She smiled, typing back, "Monday morning. And Marcus, I want you to lead the implementation team." As she worked through the afternoon's emails and calls, Denise found herself thinking about the broader implications of the day's events. The community investment program would bring banking services to underserved neighborhoods, but it would also demonstrate that financial institutions could succeed by embracing, rather than avoiding, diversity. Her intercom chimed, and Patricia's voice filled the office. "Ms. Walker, Mr. Reynolds from security is here to see you. He says you asked him to stop by after the board meeting." Denise had almost forgotten about her promise to continue the morning's conversation. She glanced at her watch, noting that it was nearly 4 o'clock, and realized that the security guard had probably been anxious about their unfinished discussion all day. "Send him in," she said. Reynolds entered the office with obvious nervousness, his uniform pressed and his demeanor formal. He approached her desk with the careful steps of someone who wasn't sure about his reception. "Ms. Walker, thank you for agreeing to see me," he began. "I wanted to follow up on our conversation this morning and to let you know that I've been thinking about everything you said." "Please, sit down," Denise said, gesturing toward the chairs in front of her desk. "I'm interested to hear your thoughts." Reynolds settled into the chair, his posture rigid with tension. "I've been working security for over 20 years, and I thought I was good at reading people and situations. But this morning showed me that I was making assumptions without even realizing it." He paused, clearly struggling to articulate his thoughts. "When I saw you in casual clothes, I didn't just think you might be service staff. I thought you looked like someone who didn't belong in the main lobby. And that's not about security protocols. That's about my own biases." Denise nodded, impressed by his willingness to engage in genuine self-reflection. "What do you think we should do about that?" "I want to help with the training program you mentioned," Reynolds said. "Not just attend it, but help design it. I think other security officers need to hear from someone who made this kind of mistake and learned from it." The offer surprised Denise, both for its humility and its potential effectiveness. Reynolds had experienced the consequences of unconscious bias in real time, which gave him unique credibility to teach others about avoiding similar mistakes. "That's exactly the kind of authentic learning approach that could make a real difference," she said. "Are you prepared for that to be uncomfortable? To have your mistake become a teaching tool for the entire organization?" Reynolds nodded without hesitation. "If it prevents someone else from feeling the way I made you feel this morning, then it's worth any discomfort on my part." They spent the next 20 minutes discussing the structure of a new training program that would address both security protocols and unconscious bias. Reynolds offered insights about the mindset and assumptions that security staff brought to their interactions with building visitors, while Denise contributed perspectives about the impact of those assumptions on the people who experienced them. "Mr. Reynolds, I want you to know that I respect your willingness to learn from this experience," Denise said as their conversation concluded. "That takes courage, and it's exactly the kind of leadership that organizations need at every level." "Thank you, Ms. Walker," Reynolds replied, standing up to leave. "And congratulations on your board meeting. Word travels fast in this building, and everyone's talking about the community investment program being approved." As he left, Denise reflected on the parallel between their morning's interaction and the afternoon's board meeting. In both cases, she had faced assumptions about her capabilities and motivations. In both cases, she had chosen to respond with education rather than anger, with bridge building rather than confrontation. Her phone rang, displaying the bra number for her mother, Dr. Angela Walker, who had recently retired from her position as a community college accounting professor. Denise smiled as she answered, knowing that her mother would want to hear about the day's events. "Denise, honey, how did the board meeting go?" her mother asked without preamble. The program was approved, Denise replied, settling back in her chair with the first genuine relaxation she had felt all day. 7 votes in favor, and we start implementation on Monday. I'm so proud of you, her mother said, her voice thick with emotion. I know how much this program means to you, and I know how hard you've worked to make it happen. Mom, something else happened today that I want to tell you about, Denise said, and she recounted the morning security incident and the conversations that had followed. Her mother listened without interruption, occasionally making small sounds of understanding or disapproval. When Denise finished, there was a long pause before her mother spoke. Baby, do you remember when I was working as a cleaner while I was going to school? She asked. Of course, Denise replied. You used to bring me to the office building sometimes when you couldn't find a babysitter. Do you remember how the security guards treated me? Denise thought back to those childhood memories, remembering waiting in lobby chairs while her mother signed in at security desks. Remembering the way guards would scrutinize her mother's identification and sometimes question her presence in buildings where she worked every night. They made you feel like you didn't belong there, Denise said quietly. Exactly, her mother replied. And now, 30 years later, you're the CEO of one of those buildings, and someone made the same assumptions about you that they made about me. But here's the difference. You have the power to change those assumptions for everyone who comes after you. The observation hit Denise with unexpected force. She had spent the day thinking about the personal impact of the security incident and the professional significance of the board meeting. But she hadn't fully considered the generational implications of both events. The community investment program isn't just about banking services, her mother continued. It's about changing the way institutions think about the communities they serve. And your response to what happened this morning isn't just about one security guard. It's about changing the way people are treated when they don't fit someone else's expectations. As they continued talking, Denise found herself thinking about the broader narrative of the day's events. The security incident had forced her to confront assumptions about who belonged in corporate spaces, while the board meeting had challenged assumptions about what kind of leadership was appropriate for financial institutions. Both situations had required her to choose between accommodating other people's expectations and asserting her own vision of what was possible. In both cases, she had chosen to use the moments as opportunities for education and change, rather than simply defending her position. After ending the call with her mother, Denise looked out her office windows at the Manhattan skyline, now beginning to glow with the lights of evening. Somewhere in the city below, there were communities that would soon have access to banking services that had been denied to them for generations. There were small business owners who would be able to access capital to grow their enterprises, and families who would no longer have to travel miles to cash paychecks or open savings accounts. The community investment program represented more than financial strategy. It represented a recognition that successful institutions were those that could adapt to serve diverse constituencies, rather than expecting those constituencies to conform to institutional expectations. Her computer alarm chimed with an email notification, and she looked up to see a message from Chief Morrison with the subject line, New Security Training Program Draft. The message included a detailed proposal for unconscious bias training that incorporated Reynolds's insights and experiences. As she reviewed the proposal, Denise realized that the morning's security incident had created an opportunity for systemic change that extended far beyond one guard's mistake. The new, quote, training program would address not just security protocols, but the broader question of how institutional representatives should interact with all visitors, regardless of their appearance or assumed status. Her phone buzzed with another text message, this one from board member David Roberts. Proud to have supported your program today. Looking forward to seeing the impact on communities across the country. The message was followed by several others from board members, executives, and community partners who had heard about the program's approval. The response was overwhelmingly positive, suggesting that the Community Investment Initiative had struck a chord with people who understood the importance of extending financial services to underserved populations. As the office grew quiet around her, Denise found herself reflecting on the unexpected connections between the day's events. The security incident had challenged her personally, while the board meeting had tested her professionally. But both situations had ultimately demonstrated the same principle. That authentic leadership required the courage to challenge assumptions and create space for different perspectives. She packed up her presentation materials and headed toward the elevator, her sneakers still silent against the carpeted hallway. As she waited for the elevator doors to open, she looked back at the executive suite, where she had spent the day defending and ultimately advancing her vision for the company's future. The elevator descended through the floors of Meridian Tower, past apartments where employees were finishing their work for the day, past conference rooms where deals were being negotiated and strategies were being planned. When the doors opened in the lobby, Denise found herself facing the same security turnstiles that had created such drama that morning. Reynolds was at his post, and he looked up as she approached. "Good evening, Ms. Walker," he said with a respectful nod. "Congratulations again on your successful board meeting." "Thank you, Mr. Reynolds," she replied, "and thank you for your commitment to helping improve our training programs. I think we're going to create something really meaningful together." As she walked through the turnstiles toward the building's exit, Denise reflected on the transformation that had occurred in her relationship with Reynolds over the course of a single day. The morning's confrontation had evolved into an afternoon's collaboration, demonstrating that conflict could become the foundation for positive change when approached with open minds and genuine commitment to collaborate. Learning. The street outside Meridian Tower was busy with evening commuters, people heading home after long days in offices and meeting rooms across the financial district. Denise joined the flow of pedestrians, her casual clothes allowing her to blend into the crowd in a way that her usual business attire never did. As she walked toward the subway station, she thought about the communities that would benefit from the newly approved investment program. Tomorrow, she would begin the process of turning board approval into operational reality, working with community partners to identify branch locations, hiring staff who understood local needs, and developing services that would make banking accessible to people who had been excluded from traditional financial systems. The program would face challenges and skeptics, and there would undoubtedly be moments when its success seemed uncertain. But today had demonstrated that institutional change was possible when leaders were willing to challenge assumptions and create space for different approaches to success. Her phone rang as she descended into the subway station, and she glanced at the screen to see a call from Marcus. "Denise, I've been thinking about implementation strategies for the community program," he said without preamble. "I have some ideas about partnerships and pilot expansion that I'd like to discuss." "Let's talk about it on Monday," she replied, smiling at her deputy's enthusiasm. "But Marcus, I want you to know that your support today meant everything. Having allies who believe in the vision makes all the difference." "That's what teams are for," he replied. "Besides, I think this program is going to transform not just the communities we serve, but the way Meridian thinks about its role in society." As the subway train carried her home through the tunnels beneath Manhattan, Denise found herself thinking about the unexpected lessons of the day. The security incident had reminded her that assumptions about appearance and belonging could create barriers even for people who had achieved significant success. The board meeting had demonstrated that visionary leadership sometimes required taking positions that challenged conventional wisdom about what was safe or profitable. But both experiences had also shown that authentic change was possible when people were willing to engage in honest dialogue about assumptions, biases, and opportunities for improvement. Reynolds had transformed from someone who saw her as out of place to someone committed to ensuring that others wouldn't experience similar exclusion. The board had moved from skepticism about community investment to approval of a program that could serve millions of underserved customers. The train emerged from underground as it crossed into Brooklyn, and Denise could see the lights of Manhattan receding behind her. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, new chances to prove that institutions could succeed by embracing rather than avoiding diversity. As she walked the final blocks to her apartment, Denise reflected on the full arc of the day's events. She had begun the morning as someone whose presence in her own building was questioned, and she was ending it as the leader of an approved initiative that would extend banking services to communities across the country. The transformation hadn't been easy or automatic. It had required confronting uncomfortable assumptions, defending her vision against skeptical colleagues, and choosing education over anger when faced with bias and exclusion. But the results demonstrated that authentic leadership could create change that extended far beyond individual success. Her apartment building's doorman greeted her with the familiar respect that came from years of professional relationship. "Good evening, Ms. Walker. I hope you had a successful day." "Very successful, thank you, James," she replied, thinking about the layers of meaning contained in that simple exchange. Unlike the morning's interaction with building security, this conversation was built on mutual recognition and respect, the kind of relationship that she hoped to model throughout her organization. As she settled into her apartment and changed from her hoodie and jeans into comfortable evening clothes, Denise found herself looking ahead to the months of work that would be required to implement the community investment program. There would be site selection and staff hiring, community engagement and regulatory compliance, financial management and performance measurement. But there would also be the deeper work of cultural change, of creating an organization that could serve diverse communities effectively because it understood and valued diversity within its own ranks. The security training program would address bias and assumptions, while the community investment program would demonstrate that financial success and social responsibility could reinforce rather than compete with each AMR. Her phone buzzed with a final message of the day, this one from her mother. "Saw the news coverage of your program approval. Your grandmother would be so proud to know that her great-granddaughter is bringing banking to communities like the one where we grew up." Denise smiled, thinking about the generational journey that had brought her from a neighborhood without bank branches to the executive suite of a major financial institution. The community investment program would ensure that other families wouldn't have to travel that entire distance, that opportunity and access could be available closer to home. As she prepared for bed, Denise reflected on the day's central lesson, that authentic leadership required the courage to challenge assumptions about who belonged in positions of power and what those positions should be used to accomplish. The security incident had challenged assumptions about her personally, while the board meeting had challenged assumptions about the company's strategic direction. In both cases, she had chosen to respond with vision rather than defensiveness, with education rather than anger, with bridge building rather than boundary setting. The results suggested that this approach could create change that was both meaningful and sustainable. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, new chances to prove that institutions could evolve to serve communities that had been historically excluded from financial services. The community investment program was just the beginning of that transformation, a demonstration that success could be measured not just in shareholder returns, but in the expansion of opportunity for all stakeholders. The day had begun with a security guard questioning her right to enter her own building, and it was ending with board approval for a program that would question traditional assumptions about who deserved access to financial services. Both moments had required defending not just her own position, but her vision of what was possible when institutions embraced rather than avoided diversity. As she drifted off to sleep, Denise thought about the communities that would soon have access to banking services that had been denied to them for generations, about the security guards who would receive training that would help them see all visitors as deserving of respect, and about the other young professionals who might find their own paths to leadership a little easier because of the precedents being set today. The community investment program would face challenges and setbacks, and there would undoubtedly be moments when its success seemed uncertain. But today had demonstrated that institutional change was possible when leaders were willing to use their positions to create opportunity, rather than simply maintain the status quo. The morning's confrontation with building security had become the catalyst for systemic change in how the institution treated all visitors, while the afternoon's board meeting had approved a program that would extend that same principle of respect and inclusion to entire communities across the country. Both outcomes had required the same fundamental choice, whether to accept existing assumptions about who belonged and who deserved access, or to challenge those assumptions in service of a more inclusive vision of success. Denise had chosen challenge over acceptance, vision over convention, and the results suggested that this approach could create change that was both meaningful and sustainable. The story that had begun with a security guard directing her to the service entrance was ending with the approval of a program that would ensure millions of people would no longer be directed away from the services they needed to build better lives for themselves and their families. It was, she realized as sleep finally came, exactly the kind of transformation that justified every challenge she had faced on her journey to the executive suite. Glanced at the newspaper headlines, noting stories about economic inequality and the role of financial institutions in addressing social challenges. The timing was fortuitous, suggesting that her community investment program aligned with broader conversations in the industry. "Any word from the other board members?" she asked. "Roberts and Kim called to express support for the program," Patricia replied. "And Morrison wanted to confirm that you'll be presenting the 3-year financial projections." 2 supportive board members out of 12 wasn't enough to guarantee success, but it was a start. Denise knew that she needed at least 7 votes to approve the program, which meant winning over several members who were currently undecided or opposed. Her computer chimed with an email notification, and she looked up to see a message from the building's security department. The subject line read, "Incident Report and Policy Review," and the sender was listed as Chief of Security James Morrison. "This should be interesting," she muttered, opening the email. The message was professionally written, but clearly urgent in tone. Morrison had reviewed the morning's incident through security camera footage and wanted to schedule an immediate meeting to discuss policy changes and staff retraining. He also requested permission to issue a formal apology to Denise and to implement new protocols for executive identification. "The security chief wants to meet," Denise told Marcus, showing him the email. "He's probably terrified that I'm going to fire half his department." "Are you?" Marcus asked. Denise considered the question. Her first instinct was to use the incident as an opportunity for systemic change rather than individual punishment. But she also recognized that some consequences were necessary to demonstrate the seriousness of what had occurred. "I'm going to turn it into a learning opportunity," she said. "But there need to be real changes, not just sensitivity training that everyone forgets about after a few weeks." She typed a quick response to Morrison, agreeing to meet after the board meeting and requesting a comprehensive review of security protocols. The morning's incident had revealed gaps in the company's systems that extended beyond one guard's assumptions. As she worked, Denise found herself thinking about the broader implications of the day's events. The security incident and the board meeting were both manifestations of the same underlying challenge, proving her legitimacy as a leader in spaces where people who looked like her had historically been excluded. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was fighting for a community investment program on the same day that she had been mistaken for service staff in her own building. Both situations reflected assumptions about who belonged in positions of power and who deserved respect and consideration. Her phone rang again, this time displaying the number for board member David Roberts, one of the supporters Patricia had mentioned. Roberts was a veteran banker in his 60s who had initially been skeptical of Denise's appointment but had become one of her strongest allies. "Good morning, David," she answered. "Denise, I wanted to touch base before the meeting," Roberts said in his characteristic gravelly voice. "I've been talking to some of the other board members, and I think you should know that there's more opposition to the community program than we initially anticipated." "How much opposition?" "Hartwell has been working the phones, and she's got at least 4 definite votes against the program. She's arguing that it's a departure from our core mission and that the returns don't justify the risk." Denise felt her stomach tighten. 4 definite votes against meant she needed 8 of the remaining board members to support the program, a much higher bar than she had hoped for. "What's her main argument?" Denise asked. "She's saying that you're letting personal politics influence business decisions," Roberts replied bluntly. "She's questioning whether you're the right person to lead the company if you're going to prioritize social causes over shareholder returns." The words hit Denise like a physical blow. She had expected financial objections to the program, but the personal attack was both surprising and deeply frustrating. Her entire career had been built on delivering results, on proving through performance that she belonged in leadership positions. "David, you know my track record," she said. "Every major initiative I've led has exceeded financial projections. I'm not asking the board to approve a charity project. I'm asking them to approve a growth strategy that happens to have positive social impact." "I know that, and you know that," Roberts replied. "But Hartwell is playing on fears that you're not focused on the traditional metrics of success. She's making it about leadership philosophy rather than program specifics." Marcus was watching Denise's face, clearly reading the tension in her expression. He pulled out his tablet and began typing notes, probably preparing alternative arguments or backup strategies. "What do you recommend?" Denise asked. "Lead with the financial projections," Robert said. "Don't give them any opportunity to frame this as social activism. Make it clear that this is about market expansion and revenue growth, period. But the social impact is part of the value proposition." Denise protested. "Community banking works because it builds trust and loyalty in ways that traditional banking doesn't. You can't separate the financial returns from the community relationships." "Then you need to frame the community relationships as a competitive advantage, not as a moral imperative," Roberts replied. "These are bankers, not social workers. They want to hear about market penetration and customer acquisition, not about serving underbanked populations." The conversation continued for another few minutes, with Roberts offering tactical advice about presentation strategy and board member preferences. But as Denise hung up, she felt a familiar frustration about having to downplay her authentic motivations in order to achieve her goals. "Bad news?" Marcus asked. "Harwell has been building opposition by questioning my motivations rather than the program's merits," Denise replied. "She's trying to frame this as ideology over strategy." Marcus frowned, his analytical mind clearly working through the political implications. "That's a dangerous argument because it's harder to refute with data. Financial projections are objective, but questions about leadership philosophy are subjective." "Exactly," Denise said. "She's not arguing that the program won't work. She's arguing that I can't be trusted to make decisions based on what's best for the company, rather than what aligns with my personal values." The challenge was particularly frustrating because Denise had always been careful to ground her decisions in solid business analysis. The community investment program had emerged from 18 months of market research, financial modeling, and pilot program testing. It wasn't a passion project disguised as business strategy. It was a business strategy that happened to align with her values. Patricia knocked and entered again, this time carrying a folder of documents and looking slightly harried. "Ms. Walker, I have the final board packets ready for review, and I've received confirmation that the presentation equipment is set up in the boardroom. Also, Chief Morrison is here to see you if you have a few minutes."